Kate McClymont is not just one of this country's finest journalists, she's also the epitome of resilience. Her bête noire, Eddie Obeid of Long Bay, has called her a lowlife and a journalist equivalent of a gun mole. Charming individual. Kate has also coped with death threats and various other forms of intimidation over her stellar career, but that hasn't stopped her from shining a light on corruption and wrongdoing, be it in rugby league club rooms or ministerial offices. Her efforts have garnered her 5 Walkley Awards, including the Gold, and she's also the recipient of the Press Council's Press Freedom Medal. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Kate McClymont.
Thanks very much, Michael. And I was very sad that I've only just run into our barrister, Sandy Dawson, right then. And he did remind me that I am being sued over another speech I gave at the Press Freedom dinner a couple of years ago. So I'm sort of feeling, gee, maybe I should have taken that opportunity, but I had that last one legaled as well. Anyway, I'm sure many of you here tonight are as obsessed as I am about the Harvey Weinstein happenings. And I just think that, Ronan Farrow from The New Yorker, like his Harvey Weinstein story was absolutely brilliant. But this week's story on the cover-up that happened when Harvey Weinstein did his utmost to stop the truth from coming out, it sent shivers down my spine, and I'm sure a lot of journalists here. And look, we all know what formidable, powerful people can be like when they want to stop you from writing something. When they want the story buried or they want to stop a criminal investigation from happening. But utterly depressing was the starring role played in this tale of Weinstein's treachery by an Australian journalist. I'll come to that in a minute. But just going back to Farrow's story in The New Yorker, Weinstein engaged not one, but 2 companies expert in the dark arts of corporate investigations. The first was Kroll, one of the world's largest corporate intelligence companies, and the second was Black Cube, an enterprise mainly staffed by former officers of Mossad and other Israeli intelligence agencies. Now, 2 private investigators from Black Cube, using false identities, met with the actress Rose McGowan. She was the one that eventually publicly accused Weinstein of rape. Anyway, they met her to extract information from her. One of those investigators, calling herself Diana Phillip, pretended to be a woman's rights advocate, and she secretly recorded at least 4 meetings with McGowan. Now, Diana Phillip was good. She claimed to work for Rubin Capital Partners in London. They had a website with all the customary blurbs about asset management, as well as the firm's supposed initiative, Women in Focus, which was about empowering women. And in fact, she was a former an Israeli intelligence operative. So this same Diana Phillip, using a different identity, also tried to prise information out of the New York Times journalist, who was also hot on the Weinstein trail. She also contacted Farrow, who was doing the same thing for the New Yorker. Now, the Black Cube woman pretended to the journalist she had her own allegation against Weinstein. But the New York Times journalist said she appeared to be trying to find out the identities of the women who were talking to the media. One contract obtained by Farrow, dated in July this year, bore the signature of a prominent New York lawyer. Now, this is what's really upsetting, that this guy also was representing the New York Times in defamation actions. Yet here he was, actively engaged in trying to stop newspapers, including the New York Times, from revealing information about Weinstein. Now, the document stated that the project's primary objectives are to provide intelligence which will help the client's efforts to completely stop the publication of a new negative article in a leading New York newspaper, and also to obtain additional content of a book which is currently being written and includes harmful negative information on and about the client. The client, of course, was Weinstein, and the book he was referring to was one being penned by Rose McGowan. But it didn't stop there. Over the course of that year, Weinstein paid a fortune to those two agencies to also dig dirt on the people he thought might be going to complain. Now, this is really interesting because he got them to compile psychological profiles that focused on their personal or sexual histories. There was a folder on Rose McGowan entitled Past Lovers. Now, Weinstein was looking to exploit people's chinks or their weaknesses to allow him to discredit them or to threaten them should they even think of going public. Then this is the interesting thing about the Australian journalist, because he enlisted journalists also who were very happy to help a powerful Hollywood icon attack women before they could attack him. And one of those happy to oblige was Australian journalist Dylan Howard. Now, a decade ago, Dylan Howard was unceremoniously dumped by Channel 7 in Melbourne after he paid for the stolen medical records of two AFL players who had been attending a drug rehabilitation clinic. He then moved on to selling nude photos of Lara Bingle to the women's magazines. He was fortuitously in Charlie Sheen's bathroom while Charlie Sheen was submitting himself to a drug test, and he later got his hands on Mel Gibson's grubby rants to his former partner. And my, how Dylan's star has risen. From buying medical records from Melbourne dumpster divers, Dylan Howard now sits astride the very pinnacle of the tabloid world. No offence, Col Allen. He is the editor-in-chief of American Media Inc., which publishes the National Enquirer and many other fabulous titles. When Weinstein called, Howard was only too eager to leap to his cause in aiding and abetting trapping women. In December last year, Howard sent Weinstein an email listing the efforts that he and the National Enquirer were going to help Weinstein disprove McGowan's allegations of rape. So in his email, Howard described a call that one of his reporters made to Elizabeth Avellin, the ex-wife of a movie director who had left Avellin for Rose McGowan. Avellin, the ex-wife, later told Ronan Farrow that Howard's reporter kept calling and calling and calling and was also contacting her friends. She finally called back, and in a long phone call, the reporter pressed her for unflattering statements about McGowan. Although it was agreed that it was all off the record, the reporter secretly taped the conversation. In a gushing email to Weinstein, Howard said, "I have something amazing." Eventually, she laid into Rose pretty hard, and Weinstein replied, "Oh, this is the killer, especially if my fingerprints are not on this." Dylan Howard then reassured Weinstein, "They're not, and the conversation, it's recorded." Now, Elizabeth Avellin, of course, was absolutely horrified when Farrow told her what had happened, and she said she would never have agreed to cooperate in efforts to discredit McGowan. "I don't want to shame people," she said. "I wasn't interested. Women should stand together." And of course, Howard then later explained that his actions were off the record and they were only being supplied to Mr. Weinstein at a time when Mr. Weinstein was denying any harassment of any women. Howard said he would never have actually published this off-the-record material in his own publications. So I had a chuckle reading an interview with Dylan Howard prior to his role in this very shabby affair. "I reintroduced a very important thing to the National Enquirer that you'll appreciate," he told the interviewer. "It's the old slogan, the only magazine with the guts to tell it like it is." The guts to tell it like it is. I mean, please. So tonight we are actually honouring real journalists who have had the guts to tell it like it is, and to do so when they know that they are facing real threats. And I'd like to acknowledge Chris Masters here tonight. Back in May 1987, I'd only been at Four Corners as a researcher for a couple of weeks when the Moonlight State went to air. And this was one of the seminal moments of investigative journalism in Australia. The program, which was months in the making, highlighted in alarming detail the corrupt links between politicians, police, and the criminals that police were being paid to protect. The corrupt police knew that they had to destroy Chris Masters before he destroyed them. So alarmed were the Australian Federal Police that they actually dispatched an operative to Brisbane to protect Masters from the Queensland Police. And Matthew Condon, the author of a 3-book series on police corruption in Queensland, later revealed that corrupt Queensland police had hatched a plan. And that plan was that they would plant an underage boy in Masters' hotel room in Brisbane, spring Masters with the boy, and he would be utterly discredited. Sadly, they got their timing wrong and he'd gone back to Sydney. I also remember when Paul Barry was doing his major expose on Alan Bond for Four Corners, and $250,000 arrived in his bank account. I, who was a researcher, was overjoyed by this. But a stockbroker later accused him of being on the payroll of Alan Bond's then nemesis, Tiny Rowland from Lonhro, and the money went out of the bank account, and it was never quite proved how it had got in there or why. So, you know, when people try to set you up or try to stop you, it's just absolutely imperative that we don't cave in. Only recently I was informed that an underworld figure had been trying to find out where I lived. And that very same day I was sent a text with a photo of my car and its number plate. I've continued to write about that person. But having said that, I often think that the person who is the biggest danger to me is, of course, myself. My children are constantly in stitches at my ineptitude when it comes to electronic devices. I once posted a tweet full of random letters. My phone was in my pocket, and I didn't realise this gibberish had been made public. A member of the public thought I had been kidnapped, and I was sending a coded cry for assistance. And I still don't know, someone has to tell me this, but I still don't know how I keep inadvertently sending text messages with a map, with a red pin, identifying my current location. I accidentally sent a map of my location to Felix Lyle, the then boss of the Hells Angels, and another one to Chris Mitchell, the then editor-in-chief of The Australian. He's also pretty scary at times. Now, speaking of Felix Lyle, or Big F as he is known, he became the boss of the Hells Angels after he was expelled from rival outlaw bikie gang, the Bandidos, for not being of good character. So you can imagine what kind of character Felix Lyle must be when he is expelled from a bikie gang. Not that Felix Lyle ever rode a bike. His preferred mode of transport was being chauffeured around in his bright red Bentley. Not bad for a bankrupt without a licence. Anyway, a few weeks ago, Felix Lyle's sister rang me. She wanted to give me a piece of her mind. I listened politely for a while, but I lost it when she said to me that I ruined the lives of innocent people. Now, I usually am rather polite, especially when I am speaking to the relatives of said bikie bosses, but I couldn't help it. When she said that I'd ruined the lives of innocent people, that was going a step too far. And exactly where is your brother right now? I said, oh, that's right, jail. And then I hung up. I still wasn't quite sure why she was ringing, but anyway. Earlier this year, I was disturbed to receive large A4 photos of myself with tape over my mouth. A few weeks later, these same photos were sent to me with a note pointing to a website in my name. The website featured the same photos along with allegations about what a disreputable person I was. The website had been hosted through a server in the Netherlands, making it very difficult to be taken down. But there was a breakthrough. Fingerprints were found on the envelope. I won't say more, but it was good. And of course, we have the family of that fine, upstanding citizen, currently resident, as you said, it's not Long Bay, he's now down at Berrima at the moment, Eddie Obeid. Now, in 2012, the Obeids had their very own Harvey Weinstein moment when they hired a private investigator to have me placed under surveillance in the hope that I was doing something that they could blackmail me with to stop writing about them. I mean, it didn't actually work because I'm very boring, but during the ICAC inquiry, Eddie's son-in-law, Margit, raised his fist as though he was going to punch me outside the ICAC lifts. And then his brother, Andrew, who has bikie connections, he's been posting lovely things about me. You effing ugly, putrid, smelly, filthy, redneck, unprofessional pig. Keep writing bullshit posts on Twitter and we'll see how much longer you last, you dog. Now, that's all right, but putrid, smelly. I mean, I am becoming very self-conscious about my personal hygiene or lack thereof. In the early hours of a Saturday morning last year, there I was, fast asleep, when my phone beeped. Who could be sending me a text message at 1:46 a.m? It was Eddie Hayson, and he was texting to tell me I was a dirty, unwashed beast. I mean, it's tragic enough to be called a beast, but to be called dirty and unwashed by that pillar of the sporting world, Eddie Hayson, is in my mind catastrophic. I mean, just because Eddie Hayson is a former bankrupt, brothel-owning, chronic gambler who's been banned from every TAB in the country and from the Star Casino, does not mean he has not got an acute sense of smell. Was he lying awake? Was he lying awake, tossing and turning in the wee hours of the morning, thinking, somebody really has to tell her? Now, this comes on, the previous week, he was actually trying to do me a favour. It was Sunday afternoon, and I was having lunch with friends when Eddie Hayson accidentally sent me a text message saying, Race 5, Port Macquarie, number 2, Urban Prince, get on it. I jokingly replied in my best gangster lingo, we are set at 10 large. Realising his message had presumably not been delivered to its intended recipient, Hayson responded, if you had any brains, you would be. Meanwhile, I'd looked up the race field in Port Macquarie and suggested Eddie would be better to put his money on a horse called Before You Think. As for Urban Prince, well, it wasn't such a sure thing after all, coming in at 3rd place. When I pointed out his tip was a dud, he replied, you got the jockey to pull it up, didn't you? If only I had those powers. But I have a confession to make tonight, and it's not bravery that keeps me going, it's boundless optimism. I have convinced myself that no one would really want to kill me because it would be very bad for business. Even though I sometimes worry about, there'd be so many suspects, who would they know who to look for? But I'm also optimistic about the future of journalism. I mean, sure, we're going through tough times, but the demand for quality journalism has never been greater. And for democracy to flourish, we really do need journalists who will act without fear or favour. Only last Friday, I was beside myself when our photographer, Andrew Mears, sent through his photos from the Griffith funeral of mafia boss Tony Sergi. His photos showed a cast of purple-robed priests leading out Sergi's burnished gold casket, which was piled high with a profusion of lilies and roses. Here they were, celebrating the life of one of the men who had ordered the execution of Donald Mackay, whose body is still lying somewhere out there in an unmarked grave. The contrast between the two deaths could not be more stark. So I rang the editor of the local Griffith paper to see who they had covering the funeral. No one, said the editor. What do you mean, no one? I asked in astonishment. We have to live in this town with these very people, he said. I replied that the basic principle of journalism is to act without fear or favour. If we can't do that, we shouldn't call ourselves journalists, I said to the hapless chap. And now maybe I was being too harsh, and you'll be pleased to know that I did stop myself from reminding him that the citizens of Griffith, his readers, had erected a statue of Donald Mackay in the main street, and the inscription reads, "All that is necessary for the triumph of good over evil is for good men to do nothing. Donald Mackay was a man who had the courage and honesty not to look the other way." So tonight we are here to celebrate those journalists who have had the courage and honesty not to look the other way. Long may they last, and here's to all those who will follow in their footsteps. Thank you. Thank you.
Stick around.